Okay, in thinking about brainstem contents, and this is my standard frontal section, looking at the cortical region, my thalami, midbrain, pons, medulla, spinal cord, as well as cerebellum. They're in the back. It's going right. Okay, now let's go ahead and consider what kinds of things that, before we put anybody in, what kinds of things do we think that we're going to see when we look inside the brainstem? What? So what we're going to do next is we're going to make cross sections. Three different cross sections. So we're going to be here, we're going to be here, and we're going to be here. If I make cross sections at this place, and then this place, what kinds of things do you think I should see based on all the things we've been talking about the entire semester? Say that? Cranial nerve nuclei. Yes, cranial nerve nuclei. Let's put that up there, number 1. Okay, so cranial nerve nuclei. Right? We've talked a little bit, and depending on the region that we're looking at, we should be able to predict which cranial nerve nuclei we're going to see, right? If we're looking in the midbrain, I'd be thinking cranial nerve number 3 might be the big one, right? Especially if we're looking a little bit higher up, a little rostral, okay? If I'm thinking about being in the pons, at this level of the pons, I'm going to be thinking different nuclei, because I remember there's 4 above, there's 4 in the pons, so there's 5, 6, 7, 8, all about right here, okay? And then if I'm looking down here in the medulla, right, I'm thinking other cranial nerve nuclei. So depending on where I am in the brainstem, the position of the nuclei is going to tell me where I am. So as long as you know where your nuclei are, your cranial nerves exit the brainstem from, you know which level of the brainstem you're in. That's the point. Okay, what else am I going to see in my cross sections? What am I expecting to see? Anything? What do you think? We talked about all the stuff that travels up and down from the spinal cord, from the tracts, right? Okay, let's think about some efferent tracts. Let's make number 2. No, you can go ahead and let's go ahead and put, just to make it easy to see. I always like to do my midline so you see things crossing over. Okay, if I'm thinking about cranial nerve nuclei, I can just go ahead and draw in a couple of the big ones that we had talked about previously. Going down here, it's going to be your hypoglossal, right? And then over here, just motor nucleus or trigeminal. It's going to be another one that's going to be right about here. Okay, so cranial nerve nuclei are definitely going to be in there. As far as efferent tracts are concerned, what kind of efferent tracts are going to be in, depending on what section we look at? I had to tell you there's an upper motor neuron that's up here, and the corticospinal tract is going to come down, right? The corticospinal tract is going to come down. Think about where to put that. Here. It's going to travel all the way down at the level of the pyramids, which is at the caudal medulla. It's going to decussate and then continue on down the spinal cord. Right? We're definitely going to see that thing. That's what's the name of that tract? Yeah, that's your corticospinal tract. So label it here. All right, talked about that one. That's going to be a big one. So primary motor cortex, neural cell body sends out axons, decussates at the level of the caudal medulla in what's here known as the pyramids, then travels contralaterally down through the spinal cord. Okay, so there's corticospinal tract, and we also talked about another kind of tract today. That starts up here contralaterally and ipsilaterally and comes all the way down to the level of the motor nucleus and then synapses with the lower motor neuron here that exits out. Okay. What is that? What did I say the name of that was? Does anybody remember? Yeah, this is going to be your corticobulbar tract. And there's another one. It's another one we talked about too. I'll just pop that one in there to help make sense of it all. If I had to tell you, there's this big old nucleus in the midbrain that sends out axons that immediately decusate and then travel contralaterally down through the spinal cord. What is that tract? Does anybody remember that tract? Yeah, cerebrospinal tract. Blast from the past. Okay. Okay. Those are going to be the main ones that we're going to see. Because remember, the vestibular nucleus has vestibulospinal, it's way down here. So when we're looking at upper sections, we're not going to see that. We're also not going to see the reticulospinal, which is down here. It's way down in the medulla. So we have to put efferent tracts that we'd expect to see. I'm going to say we're going to expect the corticospinal tract. The corticobulbar tract, or a combination, as well as the rubrospinal tract. You got that? Bless you. Let's see what's happening. These are all my efferent tracts. What else might I expect to see aside from efferent tracts? Afferent tracts. Perfect. So let's go ahead and we'd expect afferent tracts. Okay. We think about what's happening with DCML. So DCML is going to come in. Going to come in from one side, going to stay ipsilateral to the level of the medulla, come in, and then ascend, or decusate, ascend as the medial lemniscus all the way up to the VPL, the thalamus. All right. Oh, sorry. Yeah. This is going to be my DCML. So you're going to see here, DCML comes in, travels ipsilaterally through the vesiculus cuneatus and gracilis, decusates as internal arcuate fibers at the level of the medulla, and then travels up. What's the name of the tract as it travels up through the brainstem? Does anybody remember? Yep, that's your medial lemniscus. Perfect. So, one afferent tract that we're going to see if we go specifically through the brainstem region, it's going to be your medial lemniscus. It's the other major afferent tract that we talked about for somatosensation. Spinothalamic tract, right? So your spinothalamic tract looks a little bit different. So it's going to come in and then immediately decusate in the spinal cord and then travel all the way up to the thalamus. Decusate there. And that's going to be your spinothalamic tract. So what would be the name of this tract as it travels through the brainstem? Not a trick question. That's it. That's your spinothalamic tract. So we'd expect to see that. Spinothalamic tract, or ST2. Okay. Okay, and we also talked today for the first time about the tract that travels up through the brainstem that's responsible for receiving sensory information from the head and face area. Does anybody remember what that one is? Perfect, trigeminothalamic tract. It's kind of crowded in here, so I'm just going to put it over here. So we have your medial lemniscus. We'd expect your spinal thalamic tract. We'd also expect your trigeminothalamic tract. And those are the major afferent tracts that we've talked about. But all those have to cross or have to travel through the brainstem, which is why the brainstem is kind of complicated. And then there's one more thing that we talked about that you're going to see in the brainstem if you look, when you look at the cross sections, and that's going to be your cerebellar connections. So that's going to be your cerebellar connectors. That's going to be your inferior, middle, and superior cerebellar peduncle. Okay. And I can just sort of draw them in loosely here on the side. There's your superior. Okay, and when you actually look at the brainstem proper, the superior and the inferior are actually traveling up and down in the middle, side to side. So we'll point that out when we get there. Okay, so when we look at cross sections of the spinal cord, not spinal cord, I'm sorry. When we look at cross sections of the brainstem, we're going to look at 3 different parts. Okay, 3 different areas. We're going to look at up here, we're going to take a cross section view of the rostral midbrain. Okay. We're also going to look here at the caudal pons. And we're also going to look at the rostral medulla, right about here. And then we have, now all we got to do is look to see what we see when we do cross sections. I think the first one you guys have is your next one, medulla, nuclei, and tracts. Your next paper. Okay, let's go. Any questions about what we'd expect to see before I move on? The contents of the brainstem. All those things should be there, so we should be looking for them. Make sure we know where we are. All right, so brainstem contents. Let's go ahead and move over to the medulla, the rostral medulla, nuclei, and tracts. Okay, a lot of this stuff is things that we've talked about before, and I really just have to get you oriented to what's dorsal and ventral. And I will tell you that, so some books have dorsal on the bottom and ventral on the back and vice versa, so it just depends on which textbook you're looking at. For these, so and this is a cranial nerve axon coming out here. That's your cranial nerve exiting. So that's a clue because your cranial nerves, except for cranial nerve number 4, are always going to exit ventrally. So this down here is going to be ventral. And this back here is going to be dorsal. Okay, and we start thinking about this is ventral and this is dorsal and this is a medulla. All right, I'm going to start labeling some parts of the medulla that we know, and this is going to be your pyramid. All right, it's going to be your olive. Remember that sulcus. Where the cranial nerve exits, we talked about this cranial nerve exiting in the pre-olivary sulcus, so I'll go ahead and label that. You can see it's coming out right there. That's your pre-olivary sulcus. Start out with an easy cranial nerve. I see one cranial nerve, and you guys know that this cranial nerve exits the medulla at the pre-olivary sulcus. And I'll go ahead and color my cranial nerves yellow. That's what we've done so far. So this is the cranial nerve nucleus here. Which cranial nerve is this? 12. Perfect. This is going to be your hypoglossal. So here's your hypoglossal nucleus. And then here's cranial nerve 12. That's the axon that's coming out. Okay, in the pyramid, what travels down and crosses over in the pyramids? What would this be? What crosses over in the pyramids? Cortical spinal tract, yeah. So this is going to be a big one. You're going to see this one coming through, right? This is right here. You can tell it's ventral. It's in your pyramid. This is your corticospinal tract traveling down. So, most ventral, it's red motor corticospinal tract, okay, in the pyramid. Okay, now, what did we talk about that resides in the area of the olive? Does anybody remember? It has to do with the cerebellum and it puts out climbing fibers. That's it. That is your inferior olivary nucleus right here. In the olive is your inferior olivary nucleus. Okay, big little thing. I'll label it over here. Okay, that's a big one for learning motor stuff. There's some things, so let's go ahead and do the word lemniscus. It really has to do with the shape of the thing. It's sort of an elongated column-like structure of white matter axons traveling through. And this is going to be medial, and it's got this elongated shape to it, which really just means lemniscus. I'm going to color it this. So this is your medial lemniscus. What information is medial lemniscus carrying up to the cortex, or this? There you go. Fine touch, proprioception, vibration from both upper and lower extremities. So this is your medial lemniscus. Very good. Okay. Other things think about, so stay in the area of sensory. Over here, we have, this is the name of the tract that is carrying crude touch, pain, and temperature up to the thalamus. This one right here. So what would this tract be? That's it. This is your spinothalamic tract. Crude touch, pain, and temperature up to the level. Color. Okay, just outside, but still medial. And this is going to be the tract that carries information about crude touch, pain, and temperature from the area of the face up to the thalamus. This guy right here. Which one is that? Yep, this is your trigeminothalamic tract. Okay, there's a couple of little dots here we'll talk about. If it's new, I'm going to wait till the end to tell you about it. But this was represented by kind of a rectangle here. This is your rubrospinal tract. Like we expected to see. Color. Okay, so here's another one that we expected to see. It's a sensory nucleus. It's where all the information about general sensation, synapses to, from the head and face area. What was the name of that nucleus? It's a pair of them really, but consider them as one. Let's go say this is the spinal nucleus of trigeminal. All general sensory information from anything above the neck. It's the spinal nucleus of trigeminal. Should have saved that one. Yeah. This is the nucleus. This is the nucleus here that doesn't know who it belongs to. It's a motor nucleus for both cranial nerve number 9 and cranial nerve number 10. Yeah, that's your nucleus ambiguous. Nucleus ambiguous. Another nucleus that we talked about previously that's responsible for receiving all information about taste. Yep, this is your solitary nucleus right there. Put that in black so they have the same color. So here's your solitary nucleus. A lot of nuclei in the medulla. There's one more main nucleus that has to do with cranial nerve number 10, and I'm going to put it in green, and it's responsible for the parasympathetic innervation of heart, lung, and GI. Here, anybody remember the name of that one? It's dorsal, right? It's most dorsal, right? This is your dorsal motor nucleus. Dorsal motor nucleus. And this, you get a little bit of this as a connector. This is the most inferior connector of the brainstem to the cerebellum. And this right here is going to be your inferior cerebellar peduncle. Inferior cerebellar peduncle. Main entryway for mossy fibers into the cerebellum, specifically dorsal spinocerebellar. Okay, now there's a couple here that we haven't talked about yet. Let's start with one of them, and I'm just going to keep them black in color. This make easy to see. Usually somewhere around the area of this medial lemniscus, there's going to be something that it also has medial as part of its name. Okay. This is something that we're going to talk about when we get to the vestibular portion of the course. And this is going to be your medial longitudinal fasciculus. Okay, or MLF for short. Your medial longitudinal fasciculus. We're going to talk about it being a tract where nerves that are responsible for eye movements, coordination of eye movements travel through. Okay, when we get to the vestibular, we'll talk more about it. That's your medial longitudinal fasciculus. Then there's only one more that we haven't talked about yet, and that's going to be this guy right here. It's just a small little dot. It's a very small tract. Okay, that's going to be your sympathetic tract. We've covered almost everything. Okay, your sympathetic tract. When we get to the brainstem vascular syndromes part of the course, which is at the very end, we'll talk more about the sympathetic tract and the importance of recognizing some patient signs and symptoms that indicate there's a problem with this tract. Okay, I'm not going to do it now though. This is a lot of stuff. All right, questions? This is all the things that we talked about. Most of the stuff, I mean, we've covered all this stuff now. The only difference is you're seeing it as a cross section through the medulla. Okay, you're looking at all these nuclei and you know, things we've seen previously. Cerebrospinal tracts was going to be your efferent tract, corticospinal tract. Down here at the level of the medulla is going to be your efferent tracts. Your afferent tracts are going to be your medial lemniscus and your spinal thalamic tract, as well as your trigeminothalamic tract. Talked about different motor nuclei. Talked about the cerebrospinal tract previously. And your solitary nucleus, responsible for taste, dorsimotor nucleus. The main connector, a little bit of the inferior cerebellar peduncle is visible in the medulla. Questions? Okay, let's move on. This is medulla, nuclei and tracts. Next one, we'll look at the caudal pons. Oh, just want to point out, so how do you know, what would be the dead giveaway that this was the medulla? Cranial nerve 12, right? You know the cranial nerve 12 is in the medulla, so cranial nerve 12. Perfect. Now, let's look at the caudal pons nuclei and tracts. A lot of stuff still has to travel through the pons on its way up to the thalamus or its way down to the spinal cord. Okay. I'll do it this way, I think. Yeah. So, if I told you this were a great big reservoir filled with cerebral spinal fluid that resides in the pons, what would you call that? What is that? What is the name of that part of the ventricular system? That is the fourth ventricle. Very good. Okay, there's your fourth ventricle filled with CSF. Okay, let's talk about some cranial nerves. Let's look at. Okay, most medial cranial nerve that's going to exit the brainstem. Oh, let's label that as this is ventral again. They're both exiting ventral. So here's ventral and here's dorsal. Okay, the cranial nerve that exits the pons most medial. Which one was that? Does anybody remember? Abducens. Perfect. So here's going to be your abducens nuclei are here. Lower motor neurons. And then this is going to be your cranial nerve number 6, abducens cranial nerve here. Exits most medially from the pons. Okay. Then you have the next cranial nerve that actually resides here, but when it sends out its axons, it actually wraps around the abducens nucleus and comes out next in line. Well, which cranial nerve was next to cranial nerve 6? Just a little bit more lateral? Yeah, cranial nerve number 7, the facial nerve. So here's cranial nerve number 7. Okay, that means that this is going to be your facial nucleus. Yeah, those are the main cranial nerves that are going to be. Bless you. Okay, trying to put things together. So if I'm thinking very ventral here, I have a couple of tracts that are, and make them red in color. And I can tell you their position hasn't changed from when we just saw them in the medulla. So what would this tract be? That's your corticospinal tract. Other things we talked about, we had a something that was kind of a different elongated shape to it, and it's very medial. Yep, this is going to be your medial lemniscus. Okay, there's your medial lemniscus. Kind of something that hangs around with the medial lemniscus that we saw before. It's going to be just above it this time, so there's been a little bit of a position change. This is going to be your trigeminothalamic tract. thinking about afferent information coming in. And this time, the afferent, I think, color that I used, trying to keep the same color. Yeah, keep the same color. So this kidney bean shaped thing here, so it still has the same shape that you saw previously in the medulla, and that's going to be your spinal nucleus of trigeminal. Here, thinking still sensory information. This tract right here is going to be the one responsible for carrying true touch, pain, and temperature from the body. And this is your spinal thalamic tract. You also have, it's usually hanging around with your spinal thalamic tract. Here's this tract we haven't really talked very much about yet. Just this little black spot. It's going to be your sympathetic tract. Again, thinking about efferent tracts that we would expect to see up here. Everybody, rubrospinal tract. Again, most medial tract we haven't talked about yet that's responsible for carrying information that coordinates eye movement. This is going to be your medial longitudinal fasciculus, or MLF. And then, if you remember, there's going to be a lot of connectors in the pons that are connecting the brainstem to the cerebellum. That's what the rest of this is, and this structure right here, it's going up, and it resides at the top. It's going to be your superior cerebellar peduncle. So this is your superior cerebellar peduncle. Okay, nothing more than a bunch of white matter tracts coming out of the brainstem into the cerebellum. Major conduit for information exiting the cerebellum, efferent information coming out of the cerebellum. The majority of it goes through the superior cerebellar peduncle. Okay, another great big old peduncle is going to be this entire region here. Okay, this entire region is going to be your middle cerebellar peduncle. This, if you remember, is the great big conduit. So that's your middle cerebellar peduncle. And we have one more to consider. That's the one at the back here. And this is going to be the area, this whole area, going to be your inferior cerebellar peduncles. Okay, so a lot of information that we expected to see. Talked about the conduits for the information from the brainstem to the cerebellum. So there's your inferior, your middle, your superior cerebellar peduncle. Talked about the cerebrospinal tract as an efferent tract, as well as the corticospinal tract. Here, still about the same position. Medial lemniscus, afferent information coming in from the body about fine touch, vibration, proprioception, kind of elongated shape. Spinothalamic tract coming up, pain, crude touch, temperature. Usually traveling around with the spinothalamic tract, there's a really small tract. That's your sympathetic tract. Talk about that later in the semester. Trigeminothalamic tract, usually close by to the medial lemniscus. Trigeminothalamic tract. And then this is the spinal nucleus of trigeminal. Main sensory information coming in from anything above the neck. Okay, your facial nucleus absolutely wraps around your sixth cranial nerve, and I'm not going to say that. So facial nucleus here, axons wrap around, and then your sixth cranial nerve just comes most medial. Questions? Most stuff we've talked about before. Just a few new things. MLF and sympathetic tract. Everything else should be good, or should be words that you remember anyway. All right, last one. Moving on to the rostral midbrain. And this might, I'm not sure when, whoever has a printed out copy might have to add the this is actually the sympathetic tract. I put a little dot up here. It wasn't on the original. So I went back, and if you're on your computer, it's right now, but I realized that it wasn't there when I started looking at it this morning. So I added it to copies. And this is your sympathetic tract. Okay, I talked before, let's see, cranial nerve coming out of the midbrain. What would you expect it to be? 3, yes, it's exiting ventrally. Cranial nerve 3, that's the ocular motor nucleus. Where's my, here it is. Okay, this is going to be ventral. And that's going to be dorsal. And that's going to be cranial nerve 3, ocular motor nerve, and this is going to be my oculomotor nucleus. Okay, a really nice landmark I talked about. It's part of the ventricular system that travels through the midbrain. It's right here. What might that be? Cerebral aqueduct. Good. That's an easy landmark to remember. It's your cerebral aqueduct. Okay. Also talked about a parasympathetic nucleus that's associated with cranial nerve 3. And when I drew it before, it was kind of right connected and sort of had a similar shape to this nucleus. Does anybody remember the name of that parasympathetic nucleus? It has a weird name. Good. That's your Edinger-Westphal nucleus. Edinger-Westphal nucleus. Okay, I talked previously about there's one tract that's usually somewhere around the sympathetic tract that carries information about pain, temperature, and crude touch from the body up. It's going to be right there. That's going to be your spinothalamic tract. And you have this funky shaped lemniscus here. It's kind of medial. It's going to be your medial lemniscus. We have here, usually around the area of the medial lemniscus, there's another tract that's going to be responsible for carrying pain, temperature, and crude touch from anything above the neck. That's your trigeminothalamic tract. This little one right here usually hangs out with the medial lemniscus. Ooh, here's that big old nucleus in the midbrain that we talked about that sends down efferent information. Mostly has to do with muscle tone and upper extremity flexors. Here's your red nucleus. Ooh, and since we're in the midbrain, you might as well put this in because it's something that you'll see. There's like this dark matter or dark substance, let's say, here in the midbrain. Comes out. It's involved in making dopamine for the rest of the brain. It's going to be your substantia nigra. Black substance. Substantia black, right? Nigra. Black substance. Okay, and then there's one more area we haven't labeled yet, and that's this great big chunk of thing in the front. It's all the labeling it red for the motor. And it's actually a combination of the two main motor tracts coming down from the cortical region. Okay. This whole region right here has a specific name. It's called your cerebral peduncle. Whole region, all this red area is your, not cerebellar, but cerebral peduncle. And the cerebral peduncle is a combination of your corticospinal tract and corticobulbar tracts. Okay, corticospinal, corticobulbar. That makes sense. Something moves. Yeah, corticospinal and corticobulbar tracts. So all of that motor information traveling down from the primary motor cortex travels through your cerebral peduncles. Great big old chunk of white matter information. Questions? It's all there. It's a lot of stuff. I told you the brainstem would come someday. It's here. Yes, yeah.
What's the small dot beneath the ocular nerve?
Medial, that's your MLF. Good, thank you. That's your MLF. That's your medial longitudinal fasciculus. Most medial. That's your MLF. See a small dot that's most medial longitudinal fasciculus. Any other questions? Okay, next class we'll have some cases to do, and hopefully that'll help put a lot of this material together.